If I told you there's an everyday food sitting in millions of kitchens right now that may be increasing cancer risk, you'd probably want to know what it is immediately. And if I told you that for a lot of people, it doesn't even feel like a risky food, that it feels normal, convenient, familiar, even comforting, you'd probably be even more interested. Because the foods that do the most damage over time are often not the foods we treat like danger. They're the foods we treat like background. They're in breakfast sandwiches, lunch boxes, late-night snacks, airport meals, cookouts, deli counters, gas stations, office parties, and quick dinners when nobody has time to cook. I'm talking about processed meat, bacon, sausage, ham, hot dogs, salami, pepperoni, deli meat, the kinds of foods many people eat casually, repeatedly, and without a second thought. Now, before anybody panics, let's get one thing straight right at the beginning. Cancer is not caused by one bite, one meal, or one barbecue. That is not how this works. Cancer risk is usually about patterns, repetition, dose, timing, and the biology created by thousands of choices over years. So this is not a fear message, this is a clarity message. And here's the science. Processed meat is not just meat. It's meat that has been smoked, cured, salted, preserved, or chemically altered to last longer or taste stronger. That matters, because the processing changes the chemistry of the food. Compounds can form during curing and smoking that are linked to cancer risk, especially colorectal cancer. On top of that, when these foods are cooked at very high temperatures, grilled, charred, pan-fried hard, or flame-kissed until blackened, you add another layer of concern. Now, you may also be creating chemicals that can damage DNA. That's really the key idea. The question is not, does this food magically feed cancer cells like gasoline on a fire? That's too simplistic. The better question is, does this food create a biological environment that makes damage, inflammation, and escape from normal cell control more likely over time? That is the real question, and for processed meats, the answer from the scientific community is serious enough that it should make people pay attention. One of the biggest mistakes people make in this conversation is that they expect cancer risk to look dramatic in real time. They want a food to make them feel immediately sick. They want a warning light. They want to eat something and know right away that it was a bad idea. But that's not how most long-term risk works. You don't eat a hot dog on Tuesday and feel your cells changing by Friday. You build risk quietly. Small exposures stack. Inflammation simmers, DNA damage accumulates, repair systems get overworked. The gut environment changes, metabolic signals shift, and because all of that is invisible, people assume nothing is happening. Something may be happening. And this is where language matters. You'll hear people say, "This food feeds cancer." Technically, every cell in your body uses fuel. Cancer cells use fuel too. That does not mean one specific food uniquely nourishes cancer while all other foods don't. That's not accurate. Sugar, for example, does not feed cancer in the cartoon version you see online. Normal cells use glucose. Cancer cells use glucose. Your brain uses glucose. Your muscles use glucose. The oversimplified idea that if you stop eating sugar, you can somehow starve every cancer cell while keeping the rest of your body unaffected is just not how human biology works. But that doesn't mean food is irrelevant. Far from it. Food shapes the terrain. Food influences hormones, insulin signaling, inflammation, body weight, the microbiome, vascular function, oxidative stress, and immune performance. So when people ask whether an everyday food could be feeding cancer, what they usually mean, without realizing it, is this. Could this food be creating the conditions that help cancer start, grow, or become harder for the body to control? That is the smarter question. And with processed meat, the answer is that regular intake is linked to higher risk in ways that major cancer organizations take seriously. Now, let's talk about why. First, there's the processing itself. Curing, smoking, and preserving meat can lead to the formation of compounds that are not biologically neutral. Some of these can damage cells or contribute to the chain of events that eventually leads to cancer. Second, there's heme iron, which is naturally present in red meat and can contribute to the formation of compounds in the gut that may damage the lining of the colon. Third, there's high heat cooking. When meat is cooked at high temperatures, especially until charred, chemicals called heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons can form. You don't need to memorize the names. The important thing to know is that these compounds have been shown to damage DNA in lab settings and are one reason researchers worry about heavily charred meat. And fourth, there's the pattern problem. The people at highest risk are usually not the people who have bacon twice a month and move on with their lives. It's the people whose routine is built around these foods. Processed meat at breakfast, deli meat at lunch, pepperoni pizza for dinner, barbecue on the weekend. Repeat. That kind of repetition is what turns an occasional food into a chronic exposure. And chronic exposure is the phrase people need to remember. Because cancer prevention is rarely about perfection. It is about reducing chronic exposure to things that damage the body and increasing chronic exposure to things that protect it. That's the whole game. And once you understand that, the conversation gets more empowering and a lot less dramatic. Because now we can move from fear into strategy. Let's say you're listening to this and thinking, okay, so what am I supposed to do? Never touch bacon again? Never grill? Never eat convenience food? Live on lettuce? No. That kind of all-or-nothing thinking usually fails. It creates guilt, not health. And most people don't need more guilt. They need a framework that is realistic enough to survive real life. So here's the framework. Think less in terms of banning one food forever, and more in terms of changing its status in your life. If processed meat is a daily default, that's a problem. If it becomes an occasional choice instead of a baseline habit, that's a very different biological story. That means the first move is not necessarily elimination, it's demotion. Take it off autopilot. If bacon is your automatic breakfast, interrupt the routine. If deli meat is your lunch identity, rotate it out. If hot dogs and sausages are your easy dinner answer 3 times a week, build other easy answers. The goal is not to become morally pure about food. The goal is to make risky foods less frequent, less central, and less accumulated. That alone can matter. Now, here's where people get confused, because they hear processed meat raises cancer risk and think the replacement has to be joyless. It doesn't. You can swap processed meat for foods that actually improve the body's defenses. Beans, lentils, chickpeas, tofu, tempeh, yogurt, eggs, fish, nuts, seeds, whole grains, real minimally processed proteins and fiber-rich plant foods that work with your biology instead of constantly challenging it. And I want to pause on fiber, because fiber does not get nearly enough credit in this conversation. Fiber is not trendy. Fiber is not glamorous. Fiber does not have a flashy marketing department, but fiber may be one of the most quietly powerful tools in cancer prevention. Why? Because fiber feeds the gut microbiome. And the microbiome is not some wellness buzzword anymore. It is one of the most important biological ecosystems in your body. The bacteria in your gut help process food, produce helpful compounds, interact with the immune system, influence inflammation, and may affect how well the body resists disease. When you eat fiber-rich foods, your gut microbes ferment some of that fiber and produce short-chain fatty acids such as butyrate. These compounds help support the lining of the colon and are associated with a healthier inflammatory environment. That matters because a healthy colon is not just about digestion. It's about defense. So when you replace a processed meat sandwich with something built from whole grains, beans, vegetables, olive oil, herbs, maybe hummus, maybe salmon, maybe grilled tofu, maybe avocado, you're not just removing a risk, you're actively creating protection. That's a different mindset, and it's the mindset I wish more people had. Not, what am I no longer allowed to eat, but what kind of internal environment am I building every day? That question changes everything. Now let's talk about grilling, because this is where people often get defensive. And I understand why. Grilling is social. It's nostalgic. It tastes good. It feels human. There is something ancient and satisfying about fire, smoke, and food. So I'm not here to pretend grilled food is some strange modern evil, but the science on high-heat charring is real enough that it deserves respect. When fat drips onto open flame and smoke rises back onto the meat, or when meat gets heavily blackened, you can form compounds that are not ideal for long-term health. That doesn't mean a summer cookout is a medical emergency. It means technique matters. Cook lower and It means technique matters. Cook lower and slower when possible. Avoid eating the blackened parts. Flip more often instead of letting the surface burn. Pre-cook thicker meats to reduce grill time. And marinate. That one surprises people, but research suggests marinating meat before grilling can reduce the formation of some harmful compounds. Even that small change can shift the chemistry. Again, not perfection, reduction. Now let's widen the lens for a moment, because processed meat rarely travels alone. It usually comes with a whole dietary pattern. Refined buns, sugary drinks, chips, low fiber, high sodium, late night eating, not much movement, very little produce. So when researchers see higher cancer risk around these patterns, it's not always one ingredient acting alone like a villain in a movie. It's the total lifestyle ecosystem. That's why I'm always cautious with social media headlines. They want one bad guy, one toxic ingredient, one miracle food, one thing to demonize, one thing to worship. Biology is usually more boring and more complicated than that. A food can be convenient, normalized, culturally beloved, and still not be a great everyday staple. That is the adult version of nutrition. And if you want the simplest high-level rule, here it is. The more a food looks like it came from a living system, the more likely it is to work with your body. The more it looks like a manufactured formula designed for hyper-convenience, hyper-flavor, and hyper-repeat consumption, the more cautious you should be. That doesn't mean every packaged food is dangerous. It means your body recognizes patterns. Whole foods tend to come bundled with fiber, water, micronutrients, phytonutrients, and a structure that slows down how the body processes them. Highly processed foods are often stripped, concentrated, preserved, flavored, colored, stabilized, and engineered for overconsumption. And if you build a diet around those foods, you don't just miss out on protection, you increase exposure. So what does a protective pattern actually look like? It looks less like a cancer diet and more like a timeless food culture. Vegetables most days, and ideally more than one kind. Beans and legumes regularly. Fruit routinely, not as a special event. Whole grains that still resemble grains. Olive oil instead of industrial excess. Nuts and seeds. Tea or coffee instead of soda as your default beverage. Fish sometimes. Fermented foods if they work for you. Processed meat rarely, not routinely. And movement. Because food is only part of the picture. Exercise changes metabolism. It changes inflammation. It changes insulin sensitivity. It changes immune surveillance. Your body is not a passive container waiting for disease. It is an active defense system, and movement helps tune that system. Sleep matters too. Stress matters too. Body fat distribution matters too. Alcohol matters too. This is one reason I dislike the phrase superfood. It makes people think health is built by adding one heroic ingredient while leaving everything else untouched. That is not how this works. No berry can cancel out a pattern of chronic damage. No supplement can fully out-negotiate a life built on ultra-processed convenience. And no single food, on its own, explains all of cancer. But certain everyday foods can absolutely push risk in the wrong direction when they become habitual, and processed meat is one of the clearest examples of that. So if you're wondering what to actually do after hearing all this, here's the practical version. First, audit frequency, not emotion, frequency. How often is processed meat actually showing up in your life? Daily? Several times a week? Only socially? You need an honest answer before you need a perfect answer. Second, replace before you remove. People fail when they subtract without building alternatives. Find 2 breakfasts, 2 lunches, and 2 fast dinners that don't depend on processed meat. Make the better choice convenient. Third, protect the gut. More fiber, more plants, more diversity. Your microbiome thrives on variety, not monotony. Fourth, respect cooking method. Char less, burn less, grill smarter. Fifth, stop chasing food myths. The goal is not to fear fruit because it contains sugar. The goal is not to believe that one green powder will save you. The goal is to understand patterns that are backed by serious evidence. And sixth, give up the fantasy that healthy eating has to look extreme to be effective. It doesn't. Consistency beats intensity. A sustainable 20% improvement that lasts for years is more powerful than a dramatic cleanse that lasts 6 days. That is true in medicine, and it is true in life. So yes, this everyday food could be pushing your biology in the wrong direction. Not because it has mystical powers, not because one bite is catastrophic, not because you need to become afraid of every meal, but because what feels ordinary can become influential when it is repeated often enough. That is the real lesson. The biggest risks in health are often the most normalized ones, and the most powerful prevention tools are often the least glamorous ones. Cook more, move more, eat more plants, eat more fiber. Treat processed meat like an occasional extra, not a dietary foundation. And remember, your body is not helpless here. Your cells are always responding to the environment you create. Your gut is always listening. Your immune system is always watching. Your blood vessels are always adapting. Your metabolism is always taking notes. What you do every day matters. And the good news is that everyday choices can work in your favor just as powerfully as they can work against you. I'm Dr. Sophie Hale, and if there's one message I want to leave you with, it's this. Don't obsess over one food, but don't ignore repeated exposure either. When a risky food becomes routine, it stops being just food. It becomes part of the biology you live inside. Change the routine, and you begin to change the biology. That is where prevention starts.